Alright, welcome back. This is the last video for Chapter 4, looking at policy. And what we're going to do during this particular video is go back and look at guidelines for effective policy, talk about some overarching guidelines within, I don't know, 3 slides or so, and then go back to the security software development lifecycle model. You can remember the phases, investigation and design and analysis and implementation and maintenance, and apply that model to policy. How does that relate to policy? So on this first slide, what I've done is recaptured some of those general guidelines associated with effective policy. You want to use industry accepted practices. This means that there's no reason to come up with a new design for a wheel if someone else has already got an effective design for a wheel. There are lots of policy documents that are available on the web. Use Bing or Google or your favorite search tool and go find those security policies and use them. And then modify them so that they work within your security or the culture of your particular company. You want to make sure you distribute and disseminate these through multiple means so everybody knows about it, and you can get to those policies at a common website or common location. You want to make sure they're reviewed and read by the employees, understood by the employees, agreed to, and then enforced. If you don't enforce the policy, it's really meaningless. It's not going to protect you too much. You want to make sure that policy is one of those effective tools within the McCumber model or within the CNSS model. You want to make sure that that policy is effective. All right. Let's talk a little bit more about this in terms of looking at that policy development as a 2-phase component. So the first is actual design and development of the policy, and then the second is what are the managerial processes around that policy that you're going to use to get it out and maintain the policy over time. All right, so let's look at the policy development initially. Policy development got to be well planned, funded, and then managed over time to be completed. And what we're going to do now is we're going to go into each of those different phases within the security software development life cycle, and that's what that SDLC means down at the bottom, and look at the different components. So let's start with the first phase being the investigation phase. And what you're focused on here is, hey, do I have the support of senior management to pursue this policy? Doesn't make any sense to come up with a policy that senior management is not going to support. What are the goals of this particular policy, and who needs to be involved in that policy to make it an effective policy? So it may be that you need legal, human resources, or end users involved in doing this. Definitely need a program champion. Who's the one that's backing this project? It's going to have access to the CEO as the project's being deployed. You need a capable project manager. Remember back in Chapter 1 we talked about those project management tools and techniques and Gantt charts and PERT charts and critical path. Well, you need somebody who's formally trained in that to manage this project, make sure it's on time, on budget as you're working on this security policy. That's all in the investigation phase. And so what you should have at this point, you got the right people at the table, you got a scope around it, you've got the right team and the budget to deploy that. Once you do that, you're going to move into the analysis phase where you really start digging in. And during the analysis phase, you want to look at recent risk assessments or IT audit documents that talk about the needs of the organization. We want to look at what's going on worldwide and bring them in as well. Finally, you want to look at key reference documents, and we'll cover this in a subsequent chapter. But there are lots of security management models out there, and you want to, if you're using one through the organization, you want to go and review those models and look at what NIST has or ISO has in terms of the specific security policy that you're exploring, and make sure that you're being consistent in the deployment of that. This is a good phase as well to go back and look at your user agreement and make sure that if you've got any changes with this policy, that it's captured within the user agreement and that the user is accepting that agreement. All right, so we've talked about the investigation phase, we've talked about the analysis phase. We now move into the design phase, and we've got to talk here about how we're going to distribute, how we're going to verify that it was distributed. Do we need any access control lists or configuration rules built to deploy this system. All of that is done during this design phase. You may get some additional information based on feasibility or scope or cost, and you want to go back and revise those. You initially did those during the investigation phase, but you're going to have more information now. You've done your analysis, you've done your design, and so towards the end of this phase you may make some final tweaks on that feasibility or cost or project scope as necessary, and then that leads into the actual implementation. So during the implementation, you're going to write the policies, make sure you got the right people there, do the dissemination of that policy, and do some checks associated with that policy to make sure that the policy is readable and understandable by the target audience. And if you look within this, I'm going to give you an example from Word. Word has the ability to generate readability statistics on any document. I'm going to focus really on the last two. That reading ease indicator at the bottom, it's a number between 1 and 100, and higher numbers are better. So what you want to target is 60 to 70 for corporate documents. Notice this one's at 35, which means it's not an easy document to read, and if it's not an easy document to read, your users are going to, and managers are going to struggle to implement it. The last statistic or metric there, I should say, is the grade level. And in this particular example, this is an 11.9 or effectively a 12th grade document. You have to be a high school senior to be able to read that. And the general guidance that's out on the street right now is that for most corporate documents you want 7th or 8th grade level of reading. And it's, you know, it's very interesting. If you look at news broadcasts, they use language consistent with 7th or 8th grade. A little bit depressing, but that's where these types of documents are typically written. So this gives you some readability statistics as you're looking at your implementation phase, and then following that you're going to move into the maintenance phase. And during the maintenance phase you want to look at how do I maintain and modify the policy to make sure that it's effective in a changing environment. Threats are going to change, bad guys and bad girls are going to use different techniques. How do I maintain that policy? You generally want some mechanism where users can report problems with the policy, kind of like a hotline, and then periodically you want to go back and review that policy. There are going to be some folks typically that don't like a particular policy, and they may lose an initial battle, but you're going to bring them on your side if you've got a process by which at some later point, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years later, you're going to systematically go back and review those policies on schedule, and they get to make their case again, and you get to align that policy with user expectations and corporate expectations so that it can be an effective policy. So that maintenance phase is going to be important in deploying any policy. Well, guess what? We've come to the end of this particular short video, and this video has kind of looked at some general rules and guidelines associated with building policy. And then we use the security software development lifecycle model to explore the writing of policy and things you would do during the investigation, analysis, design, implementation, and maintenance phases. This finishes up Chapter 4, and we're next going to move into organizing for security, so I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video as we talk about how do you build a security organization within your company.